All right, let's talk about one of the most important books ever written on the psychology of persuasion, Influence by Robert Cialdini. This book is basically a masterclass on the hidden forces that get us to say yes, sometimes when we really should be saying no. Today, we're going to break down 3 of his most powerful weapons of influence that are shaping your decisions every single day, whether you realize it or not. And you know the craziest part? The author himself, a world-class social psychologist, freely admits he's a total sucker. He says his whole life he's been an easy mark for salespeople, for fundraisers, you name it. And that personal frustration is actually what drove him to spend years going undercover, working inside car dealerships, ad agencies, and fundraising organizations to figure out their secrets from the inside. You know you have. We've all been there. That moment you walk out of a store with a bag and you can't even remember why you bought what's inside. Or you hang up the phone after donating to a cause you'd never even heard of 5 minutes ago. Well, Cialdini found out this isn't an accident. There are these universal psychological triggers that compliance pros have learned to flip, getting us to agree automatically. To explain how this works, Cialdini came up with this brilliant metaphor: click, whir. Think about a mother turkey. Her maternal instinct, that nurturing behavior, is triggered by just one thing: the cheep, cheep sound of her chicks. In fact, scientists discovered they could get her to mother a stuffed polecat, which is her mortal enemy, as long as they put a little recorder inside it that went cheep, cheep. The sound is the trigger, that's the click, and the automatic behavior tape starts playing. That's the whir. We humans do the same thing. In our super complex world, we need mental shortcuts to survive. But those same shortcuts make us incredibly vulnerable.
Here's a perfect example of a human click-whir response. In a famous experiment, people tried to cut in line for a copy machine. When they just asked, "May I use the Xerox machine?" about 60% of people said yes. Now, if they give a real reason, because I'm in a rush, compliance shot up to 94%. Makes sense, right? But here is the absolutely wild part. When they gave a completely pointless reason, "May I use the Xerox machine because I have to make copies?" the compliance rate was 93%. The trigger word wasn't the reason, it was the word because. Just hearing it made people's brains go click, whir, and they just nodded along.
So, let's get into the first of these weapons. This one is all about creating hidden social debts. It's called the rule of reciprocity, and it's built on that old idea of give and take, except some people are professionals at the take part. I mean, think about it. This rule is hammered into our heads from the time we're kids. You return favors. You don't take without giving back. You're not a freeloader. This social glue is what holds society together. But that deep, deep sense of obligation can be twisted and used against us by anyone who wants to make us feel like we owe them something. A classic example of this used to be the Hare Krishna Society. You'd see them in airports, and they'd walk up and just give you a flower, a totally uninvited gift. You'd try to give it back, but they'd refuse, saying, "No, it's our gift to you." And then they'd ask for a donation. And people felt this incredible psychological weight from holding this unwanted flower that they'd often just give money to get rid of that feeling of being indebted. And check out how powerful this is. In one study, a researcher named Joe would buy some people a can of Coke, just a tiny, unasked-for favor. A little later, he'd ask if they wanted to buy some raffle tickets from him. The people who got the Coke bought twice as many tickets as the people who didn't. But here's the kicker. The rule was so strong, it didn't even matter if they liked Joe. People who said they disliked him still bought his tickets if he'd given them that cheap can of soda. The feeling of obligation completely overpowered their personal feelings.
Okay, on to our second weapon. This one doesn't create some external debt to another person. No, this one creates an internal debt. It's a trap that preys on our obsessive need to be and to appear consistent.
Once we make a decision or take a stand on something, we feel this massive internal and external pressure to act in line with that commitment. It's a mental shortcut, right? Consistency makes us seem rational, trustworthy, and stable. But this creates a huge vulnerability. If someone can get you to make just a small, seemingly innocent first commitment, they've laid a trap for your future self. Now, this has to be one of the most brilliant and kind of evil examples ever. Toy companies would go all out advertising a hot new toy right before Christmas. Parents would promise their kids they'd get it. But then, the toy companies would deliberately ship fewer toys than they knew people wanted. So, parents are forced to buy other substitute gifts. Then, what happens in January and February? The ads for that hot toy start running again. The kids see it and cry, "But you promised!" And to stay consistent with their promise, millions of parents would trudge back to the store and buy the toy they had already committed to. Genius, right? I mean, just look at that number, 76%. It's insane. This comes from the classic foot in the door technique. Researchers went around asking people if they'd put a massive, poorly lettered "drive carefully" sign on their front lawn. Unsurprisingly, most people said no. But in a different neighborhood, they tried something else first. They asked people to display a tiny 3-inch square sticker that said "Be a safe driver." Nearly everyone agreed. 2 weeks later, when they went back and asked that group to put up the giant, ugly sign, a staggering 76% of them said yes. That tiny first step had changed their self-image into someone who supports public safety, and they felt trapped into acting consistently with it.
All right, our final weapon for today is scarcity. The principle here is incredibly simple, but its effect is profound. We see things as more valuable when their availability is limited.
This quote just perfectly captures the psychology. We are wired to be way more motivated by the thought of losing something than by the thought of gaining something of the exact same value. Limited time offer, only 2 left in stock, deal ends tonight. These are all scarcity tactics, and they're designed to completely bypass our rational brain and force us to act now before it's too late.
So what is going on in our brains here? Well, the engine behind scarcity is a little something called psychological reactance. Basically, anytime our freedom to choose something is limited or threatened, our gut reaction is to want that freedom and whatever is associated with it more than ever. It's why a toddler suddenly has to have the one toy you just took away from them. And it's the Romeo and Juliet effect, where parental disapproval just makes the teenage romance burn even hotter.
A super simple experiment with cookies proves this perfectly. Researchers had people rate the quality of a cookie. One group of people took their cookie from a jar that had 10 cookies in it. The other group took the exact same type of cookie, but from a jar that only had 2 left. The result? People rated the cookie from the scarce jar as way more desirable, more attractive to eat, and they even thought it was more valuable and expensive. You have to remember, the cookies were identical. It was the scarcity alone that changed their entire perception of its quality.
Okay, so we've seen the weapons, we get the psychological triggers. Now for the most important part. How do we fight back? How do we stop that automatic click whir response when we realize it's being used on us?
Here are your defenses. To fight reciprocity, you have to mentally redefine the situation. If someone gives you a free gift, but it's really just a sales tactic, you can accept it without activating that feeling of obligation. It's a trick, not a gift. To fight consistency, you have to listen to your body, what Cialdini calls stomach signs. When you feel that tightening in your gut, that feeling of being trapped, that's your alarm bell. You have to pause and ask yourself the magic question. Knowing what I know now, if I could go back in time, would I still make this choice? And finally, against scarcity, when you feel that wave of emotion, that frantic desire for a limited time deal, use that feeling as a signal to stop. Just pause, calm down, and ask yourself, do I actually want this thing for what it does, or do I just want it for the thrill of owning something rare? Remember, those scarce cookies didn't actually taste any better. Cialdini uses this quote to make a really important point. Emerson didn't say that all consistency is bad, just a foolish one. The goal isn't to be unreliable. It's to avoid that automatic, unthinking, click-whir consistency that leaves you open to being exploited. You know, in the end, understanding these principles isn't just about playing defense. It's about seeing the world in a new way, recognizing the hidden architecture of human behavior that is running in the background all the time. These principles of influence aren't inherently good or bad. They're just tools, and by understanding them, you can not only protect yourself when they're used against you, but you can also use them to become a more effective and ethical parent, leader, or friend. So the real question is, with this new awareness, how are you going to use it? If you found this useful, make sure you subscribe for more breakdowns of big ideas. Thanks for watching.
If you're finding this summary valuable, do me a quick favor and hit the like button. And if you want more wisdom from the world's best books, make sure you're subscribed.